Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this 45 minutes session on standards benchmarking and harmonization. My name is Marieke van der Meijn, and I am ASI Director of Impact and Partnerships at ASI, and I'm joined by my colleague Laura Brunello, ASI Program Support, and we'll be running the session for you today. These are a regular news online series on different topics of ASI's program, on the standards, assurance, impacts. And this is actually our first one. We had an earlier session earlier today, and this is the afternoon for European time session. And we'll be providing some insight into our work on standards benchmarking and harmonization. Just before I continue, some housekeeping rules. You are all muted today during the session to reduce any background noise. You can submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen at any time, however, and we will answer them and go through them after our short presentation. We've left plenty of time at the end of the session today, around half an hour for questions and answers. When you exit the meeting, there is a short survey, and we would very much appreciate it if you could complete the survey so we can take your feedback for future sessions. And finally, the session is recorded so that we can also offer it for ASI members on the website afterwards. With that, just a quick agenda from what we'll be covering today. So first of all, we'll look at some background and key drivers for standards benchmarking and harmonization. Then we'll dive a little bit into ASI's methodology on our procedure. So we will talk about the ASI standards benchmarking and harmonization procedure. We'll also be covering the ASI log of external standards and schemes. And we'll talk a little bit about the publication of the results once the standard has been recognized by ASI or when ASI has been recognized by the external standard. And then we'll look a little bit into how the recognition works in practice. Again, for standards that are recognized by ASI or when there's been an external recognition of ASI. And then, like I said at the beginning, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So first of all, the background and key drivers for benchmarking. So ASI has a wider commitment to collaboration, and we work closely with a range of organizations to advance our collective goals. We believe that there's value for all stakeholders in identifying opportunities for recognition and harmonization in, for example, mineral and metal initiatives, but also responsible sourcing approaches and other downstream sector programs. So within our wider collaboration work, benchmarking and harmonization is just one of our activities. Other activities that fall under collaboration include, for example, data, collaborating with other organizations such as the International Aluminium Institute on data collection and analysis, or cross-sectoral learning with, for example, other voluntary standards initiatives that are also a member of the ISEAL Alliance. The objective of ASI's benchmarking and harmonization are to enhance collaboration between initiatives, to reduce unnecessary duplication of audits, and also to inform our learning and continual improvement. This can be done, for example, internally when there are gaps identified during a benchmarking assessment between ASI and the other standards. Then we use these gaps also within ASI standards revision processes. But also externally between organizations, there's been a lot of cross-sectoral learnings and opportunities happening, for example, in the mining, between mining and metals standards and initiatives for a long time. And there is continuous learning going on. And just generally, I think it's very important that ASI is being recognized by other standards, for example, in the green building sector, by green building standards, or in other platforms, for example, in the automotive industry, And this is very important to have ASI recognized in these initiatives for uptake and recognition of downstream users of aluminium. Moving on to our methodology. So ASI has a few procedures and tools in place that describe our processes for recognizing other standards. And we'll talk briefly about this today. It gets quite technical and detailed, but we wanted to give you an overview of our different procedures. So first of all, this is the ASI Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization procedure. This describes the identification, the benchmarking and review process of external standards and schemes for potential harmonization with, including recognition by and of ASI standards. This procedure consists of 5 main components that you can see on the slide. First of all, it's the identification of an external standard or scheme that's relevant and material to ASI. Then the next step in the procedure is to conduct a benchmarking assessment. Then the next step is to identify any improvement opportunities. And then the final steps are either recognition by ASI or an external recognition of ASI. The ASI Secretariat and the Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization Working Group will periodically identify and review new or changes to existing external standards and schemes. The ASI Standards Committee is responsible for reviewing and approving the recommendations made by this working group, and it is then adopted by the board. This procedure, like many of ASI's procedures and policies, can be found on our website under the library. And then you go to the document depot and you find it under our procedures. I'll now hand over to my colleague Laura to talk a little bit about the ASI log of external standards and schemes.
Thanks, Marieke, and hi everyone. I'm now going to be speaking a little bit about our external standards and schemes log. So the log is a living document that started in January 2020, and it contains a list of all of our external standards and schemes, currently around 48 that have been recommended to ASI by members. It contains 6 tables that show where the standard is in the benchmarking process. So when it's been identified, if it's been deemed relevant, if it's been deemed not relevant, when it's currently in the benchmarking process, when it has been recognized by ASI, and when there has been an external recognition of ASI. So at the bottom right, you can see a flow chart, which essentially visualizes a process when an external standard has been identified. So if it's been deemed relevant or not, and if the resources are there, whether ASI will proceed with the benchmarking. The log also explains the process for prioritization of external standards with the working group on standards benchmarking and harmonization. And of course, we can't benchmark all of these standards that are recommended to us at the same time. So we've also developed some factors for prioritization. So we take into account relevance, the resources of the Secretariat, the time it takes, etc. The log is published and can be found in Elemental under downloads, and it's updated monthly and sent alongside our monthly members newsletter. And of course, if you would like to recommend a standard for ASI to recognize, we advise you to have a look at the log first to see if it's already in there, as we often receive quite a few requests that we log in there. So I'm now going to be talking a little bit about the publication of the results. So where the standards are published, once they're recognized. So for all of the standards and schemes that have been recognized by ASI, these can be found in Elemental. So on the right, you can see that when you initiate a self-assessment to start the certification process, you will have the opportunity to show which standard your company already has, and that will be taken into account during the audits, as Marieke will speak about a little bit later. These standards are also published in our assurance manual. So chapter 3, table 3, this is the table that you can see in the middle, a small extract of it. And we also publish on our website the external standards and schemes that have recognized ASI, so an external recognition. And this is listed on our website with a brief explanation of how the external scheme or standard works.
Great, thank you, Laura. I just unmuted myself. So now the final part of our short presentation, we'll just look at in a little bit more detail to see how it works in the case ASI has recognized an external standard or scheme. First of all, during the self-assessment, an entity, if you're carrying out your self-assessment, you can then select the recognized standard from the drop-down list in Elemental, as Laura just mentioned. So for example, ISO 14001 2015 version is listed in the drop-down menu. If you hold if the entity holds that certificate that is seeking ASI certification. Once that has been selected, then the relevant criterion further down in the self-assessment is already grayed out. Then during the audit, auditors must determine equivalency based on alignment between the external standard and scheme and the ASI certification scope of the entity that is seeking certification. And I just put on the slides the definition for equivalency. This is from the draft assurance manual that is now up for public consultation. And that describes the definition for what we mean with equivalency, as I just mentioned. Where there is equivalency, the criteria, for example, 2.3a, for example, in the ASI standards can be assessed by an auditor as conformant without additional review of objective evidence or implementation by the auditor. However, the audit scope must include allowance for the verification of these standards for recognized standards and schemes. And again, I've just also highlighted or shown you a snip from the revised assurance manual, which also adds that while an auditor is not expected to evaluate conformance for equivalent criteria, an auditor may do so if there is evidence that a non-conformity may exist in that criteria. For instance, if an entity has an ISO 45001 certification at a facility within their certification scope that is deemed to be equivalent, but the auditor sees concerns with health and safety during the site visit, then the auditor may assess the criteria that were excluded from the audit scope for conformance and, if warranted, issue a non-conformance. So I would recommend you to have a look at the assurance manual that describes in more detail how the recognition works. And as you know, ASI is currently revising its standards, and these are now up for public consultation and can be found on our website. And then finally, how does it work when ASI is recognized by an external standard or scheme? So first, we complete a benchmarking assessment to meet the external standards benchmarking requirements. This can often be quite a lengthy process. This is the external standards tool or Excel spreadsheet or database that they have developed for recognizing external standards like ASI. So we have to complete these. And this can often take quite a long time. My experience is that it can take at least 6 months or even longer, sometimes shorter, but in general around 6 months. And of course, there is a lot of communication in between ASI and the other organization. Once this has been completed, ASI is then added to the external standards website and their documents. We then also add explanation on our website as well, and this you can find this under YASI, recognition by other standards and schemes. And we have included there, we have kind of separated them by green building standards, also mining and metal standards, and also ESG rating schemes. And there you can find, we've also included a little how it works overview to see how the recognition of ASI in the other standard works. And I've just shown, you can see some snips from our website here on this slide. And then once the recognition is complete, we announce it in our monthly member update as well as in the public newsletter. So with that, we have now we've got some time for questions and answers, and see if there are any questions from you today. Laura, are there any questions?
Yes, so we have a question here on who decides what external standard scheme is deemed relevant or irrelevant.
Thank you very much. Yes, so this is described in the Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization procedure. So the ASI Secretariat, when it receives a request or recommendation from a member on a particular standard, we then add this to the log, and then we will discuss this with the Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization Working Group, it's a whole mouthful, at their next meeting. And then agree and discuss whether, or discuss and agree whether this standard is deemed relevant for recognition, or whether it's more relevant perhaps to be added to the guidance or so on. And then that is further logged in the ASI log. It's then moved to the appropriate table. All right. I see we have another question. Can anyone propose a new external standard or scheme?
Yes, so that's a good question. And any ASI stakeholders, so including members, standards committee, and or working group participants, and auditors can identify and propose external standards and scheme for potential harmonization with the ASI standards and assurance program. So it's any stakeholder that has an interest.
Great. We have another question. What other standards are you looking to recognize in the future or get recognized by?
Yes, so all of these standards and schemes that are being considered or have been proposed by any ASI stakeholder can be found in the log that I spoke about a bit earlier, which is also found on Elemental, and it is also sent alongside the members' newsletter every month. So to stay updated and participate in the discussions regarding recognition and harmonization, you can participate in our Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization Working Group. So you can let us know by email if you'd like to join and participate in those discussions, and we'd be happy to have you there. And I see another question here, which is, what is meant by improvement opportunities exactly?
Thank you. Yes, so I talked briefly about that earlier. So that's one of the kind of objectives of benchmarking, is to use the to also use it within to inform our learning, ASI's learning and continual improvement. So, like I mentioned, yeah, these kind of benchmarking assessments are quite good assessments between external standards and ASI standards, and there are, when gaps are identified, we then log these and use them during standards revision processes. Also, externally, I think there are always opportunities for improvement. ASI, we also participate in other standards working groups, for example, in the Responsible Minerals Initiatives Mining Engagement Team, where also other mining metal standards are participating. So we are part of these discussions and use that also in terms of for improving our system. Also, the ISEAL Alliance, which is the kind of standard setting organization of standard setting organizations of which we are a member, code compliant member. They've done some work on interoperability between mining and metal standards, and we've also used those kind of learnings within our system. Great. Here is another question. How often do you review a standard or a scheme?
That's a good question. And ASI is going to repeat the benchmarking assessment under two conditions. So either if ASI has developed or revised a new standard. So for example, the benchmarking assessment of the standard we currently recognize will have to be done again following the publication of our new standard next year. Or if the external standard or scheme itself has changed or been revised, then we will carry out the benchmarking again. So there's no set cycle at which an ESS is benchmarked, but rather when there's been a revision to either our or their standard.
Great, thank you.
And there's another question which asks more specifically, how exactly do you benchmark a standard and decide if it meets the relevant ASI criteria?
Thanks. Yes, so this is also described in the Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization procedure. So section 5.2 in particular describes the benchmarking assessment criteria. So this includes scheme-related aspects as well as standard-related aspects. So when we talk about scheme-related aspects, this means we look at the scheme management and the standard setting process of the external standard or scheme, an overview of their requirements in the standard and the supply chain scope. We also look at the assurance methodologies, including their requirements for conformance, oversight, and reporting, as this is a really crucial part of any standards scheme. And then we also look at the nature and the type of claims that can be made under the external standard. So we've just actually developed a benchmarking checklist with the Standards Benchmarking and Harmonization Working Group. And we're currently going through the standards that are currently recognized by ASI and are in the assurance manual in table 3. And of course, as part of the standards revision, we have to see if we have to update this table and see if these standards will still meet the revised ASI performance standard and chain of custody standard criteria. So we're currently going through that table 3 list. So just I see there is another question, and I can add that at the same time, whether the table in the assurance manual is up to date with the latest recognized external standards. Yes, so the table that is in the current version of the assurance manual, this is up to date. This is also reflected in Elemental with the standards that are currently recognized. But of course, when the new standards, the revised standards are launched early next year, this will include an updated table in the assurance manual. All right. Then I see there is another question. How are recognized standards reflected in the self-assessment procedure on the Elemental platform? Yeah, we talked about that earlier as well, but there is a drop-down. When you initiate the self-assessment, there is a drop-down list of all the standards that are recognized by ASI. And when you, when this standard, when you're seeking certification for the entity, for a particular entity, and this is covered by an external standard that ASI has recognized, then you can click that. And then it means that automatically relevant criteria are grayed out in the self-assessment. So that's kind of done automatically. Just to tell everyone that this has been the first session on a 45-minute session on a particular topic, an area of ASI's work. And we will be doing these every month moving forward. And the next one will be in May. Please stay tuned for the exact date. We will announce this in the member update. And I do know that it will be on our ASI's oversight procedures. And this is a very important part of our assurance system and supports our integrity and credibility of our program. So you get some more insight into that by our colleagues Cameron and Natalie. Excellent. So, of course, if you have any other questions that's come up after the session, then please feel free to send us an email. Our email addresses are here on the slide. And we're, of course, very happy to answer any of your questions on this topic or another topic relating to ASI. We hope that you enjoyed this session, and we look forward to seeing you and speaking with you in the future.
Yes, thanks everyone for attending and for all your questions.
Thank you very much.